CEO's heart breaks. Watching little girl clear trays while rich kids mock her. The chandeliers above sparkled like falling stars, casting golden light across the vast banquet hall. Polished marble floors reflected every shimmer, giving the entire room a dreamlike glow. Waiters dressed in crisp uniforms moved swiftly, balancing silver trays filled with delicacies. The air was filled with the aroma of roasted meats, freshly baked bread, and sweet pastries. Children in elegant clothes ran about, their laughter echoing like music against the walls. Parents gathered in small groups, sipping expensive wine and discussing business deals. A soft melody played from a live band in the corner, adding sophistication to the evening. Every detail of the party screamed wealth, success, and social status. At the grand entrance, a hush of excitement spread as Adrian Parker, the Millionaire CEO, arrived. Tall, confident, and graceful, he carried the aura of someone admired by all. His tailored suit fit perfectly, every stitch speaking of his refined taste. Guests turned their heads to greet him with admiration and respect. Some whispered about his achievements, others about his generosity in business. He nodded politely, acknowledging greetings with a warm yet distant smile. To many, he was the symbol of success they aspired to become. Children peeked at him shyly, whispering to each other about the powerful man. Adrian, however, was not one to bask in flattery. His eyes searched the room with quiet observation. He noticed the glittering decorations, the lavish spread of food, the grandeur of it all. Yet something within him felt oddly detached from the splendor. Wealth was no stranger to him, but joy. That was something he valued far more. He watched as little boys chased each other, laughing with mouths full of cake. Girls in silk dresses twirled, their ribbons bouncing as they spun in circles. The sounds of laughter and cheers blended with the clinking of glasses. On the surface, the atmosphere was perfect, full of joy and celebration. But Adrian had a habit of looking deeper, beyond the surface appearances. His sharp eyes moved past the polished smiles of the parents. He noticed how some children boasted about their new toys and designer outfits. He saw how parents subtly compared their wealth through casual conversations. Adrian sighed quietly. He knew this world well, but he longed for something purer. Still, he remained calm, walking slowly into the heart of the party. The master of ceremonies welcomed him with a cheerful voice. Applause followed, echoing across the large room as he was introduced. Adrian raised his hand gently in acknowledgement, keeping his humility intact. Cameras clicked, flashes lit up, capturing his every expression. But behind his polite smile, his mind was elsewhere. The noise of wealth often blinded people, but Adrian's vision cut through illusions. He believed that true richness was found in kindness and humanity, and tonight, though the hall sparkled, his heart searched for something deeper. He moved closer to the children's section, drawn by their energy. At first, he simply admired their carefree spirit. Boys and girls laughed freely, unaware of the struggles adults carried. Their happiness seemed pure, yet Adrian knew childhood in such wealth could also breed arrogance. He watched a boy toss half a cupcake onto the floor, uncaring. Another child splashed juice from his glass, leaving sticky stains behind. The children didn't care. Servants would clean it all anyway. Parents barely noticed, too lost in their conversations about profits and properties. Adrian's smile faded ever so slightly. He wondered if these children would ever understand the value of what they had. For him, wealth was not about possession, but about responsibility. And as he continued to observe, his eyes caught something unusual. Near the corner of the hall, where the lights were dimmer, a small figure moved. Unlike the laughing children, this figure walked with quiet steps. She bent down, carefully picking up plates left abandoned on the floor. Her hands were tiny, struggling to hold the weight of the tray. Unlike the silk-dressed girls, she wore a plain, faded dress. Her shoes were scuffed, almost too old to belong in such a grand party. She avoided eye contact, keeping her head down as she worked. Adrian's brows furrowed as he continued to watch her. There was something about her movements, silent, cautious, yet determined. She was not playing, not laughing, not celebrating. Instead, she was clearing the mess others had left behind. She wiped crumbs from the table with her small palm. She stacked used glasses, trying not to spill the leftover juice. Each task was done with care, though her little hands trembled. No one else seemed to notice her presence. The parents were too busy, the children were too loud. To them, she was invisible, blending into the background of service. But Adrian's eyes were fixed firmly on her. His heart tightened at the sight. It was out of place, unfair. What was a child doing at a party like this, carrying burdens not her own? A guest passed by, almost knocking into her, but she quietly stepped aside. She didn't complain, didn't raise her voice, simply adjusted the tray and kept walking. Adrian admired her quiet strength, yet his chest ached for her innocence lost. She deserved laughter, not labor. She deserved balloons in her hands, not dirty dishes. The contrast between her and the other children was striking. They played without a care, while she carried the weight of their carelessness. The hall that once seemed bright now felt heavy in Adrian's eyes. Every laugh from the rich children sounded sharp against the silence of her struggle. He felt the noise around him fade, his focus locked only on her. The CEO, who was used to seeing billion-dollar contracts, now saw something more valuable, a truth hidden beneath luxury and pretense. The sight pierced him deeper than any business loss could. His eyes softened, his heart stirred with compassion. He could not look away, no matter how much he tried. This was not just a child at a party. This was a story unfolding before him. And in that moment, all the grandeur of the banquet hall lost its shine. The chandeliers, the golden drapes, the lavish feast, they meant nothing compared to her presence. Adrian Parker, the Millionaire CEO, stood quietly, his heart breaking as he watched. For hidden in the shadows of celebration, he had found something painful, something real. Adrian's gaze remained fixed on the fragile figure, the noise of the banquet fading into the background as if the world had dimmed everywhere except that corner. The small girl's name, whispered faintly by a passing waiter, was Lily, and the sound of it struck him with an unexpected weight, like a name far too gentle for the burdens she carried. She could not have been more than 8, her face framed by strands of hair that had loosened from a clumsy braid, her cheeks flushed with effort as she struggled to balance a tray that seemed to swallow her tiny frame. Her dress, though neatly pressed, was clearly worn. The colors faded from countless washes, the fabric stretched and frayed at the edges, yet she carried herself with a dignity that no wealth could imitate. While the other children clapped and shouted for attention, Lily moved like a quiet shadow between the tables, unseen, unheard, yet carrying the weight of the entire hall on her fragile shoulders. Adrian noticed how her small hands gripped the edges of the tray tightly, her knuckles paling from the effort, and though her arms trembled under the weight, she never once faltered in her step. He followed the subtle rhythm of her movements, the way she bent gracefully to pick up scattered napkins, the way she crouched to gather broken pieces of a dropped plate, careful not to hurt herself even as shards threatened her skin. Every action spoke of practice, as though this was not the first time she had been asked to shoulder such responsibilities, and the realization cut through Adrian like a blade. She passed by a group of laughing children who had deliberately spilled crackers onto the floor, their amusement rising as they watched her bend lower, her little back arching as she picked up every crumb without complaint. Her silence was louder than their laughter, her bowed head a quiet acceptance of a world that had already pushed her too far. Adrian's chest tightened as he saw her pause for a moment to catch her breath, her eyes flickering around the room, as though searching for approval, or perhaps simply making sure she was not in anyone's way. A faint redness lingered in her eyes, suggesting that tears had visited her recently, yet she fought hard to keep her composure, swallowing down every sign of weakness as if even that small display would not be allowed. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, then steadied the tray once more, her movements methodical, as though she had learned to place her exhaustion second to the duties expected of her. It was not just her size or her age that struck Adrian, but the unspoken story hidden behind every gesture, the story of a child who carried more weight than her years could bear. A fragment of music from the band swelled across the room, but Lily did not look up, did not dance or smile, for the rhythm of her evening was defined not by joy, but by service. She approached another table where juice had been spilled carelessly, her hands reaching for a cloth to clean it, her motions precise and practiced, like those of someone far older. Adrian's heart ached as he realized that while the party seemed endless for the wealthy children, Lily's night was a cycle of clearing, bending and lifting, her laughter stolen and replaced with silence. She passed, Ed close to him now, and for the first time Adrian saw her face clearly, the innocence still present in her wide brown eyes, despite the shadows of responsibility dimming their glow. There was a gentleness there, a spark that had not yet been extinguished, though it flickered like a candle fighting against the wind. The contrast between the silver trays in her hands and the childish roundness of her cheeks was almost unbearable, and Adrian felt his heart twist with helplessness. He wanted to step forward, to ease the burden from her, yet something in the way she carried herself stopped him. There was pride, even in her silence, a determination not to be seen as weak. He watched her balance another stack of plates, her lips pressed tightly together, her little frame shaking slightly under the strain, and still she carried on, unnoticed by the world around her. Children nearby burst into giggles at a joke, pointing toward her as though she were a character in their game, but she did not respond, did not even lift her eyes. She simply bent lower, gathering the mess they left behind. It was in that quiet persistence, that unspoken endurance, that Adrian saw the weight of her life, and though the hall glittered with riches, it was the sight of Lily's courage that burned itself into his heart. Lily bent down with care, a small cloth in her hand, as she tried to soak up the juice that had seeped into the expensive carpet, her delicate fingers pressing hard as if she could erase the stain along with the humiliation that came with it. The laughter of the other children grew louder, not with joy, but with mockery, echoing against the walls in cruel harmony that made her task even harder. A boy in a velvet jacket pointed at her and shouted with glee, "Look at her! She's our maid!" as though her pain were a performance for his entertainment. His words set off a chorus of claps from the yin. Others, their tiny hands smacking together in rhythm to her suffering, each clap like a slap to her dignity. Another boy, smirking mischievously, reached into his pocket and crushed biscuits between his fingers, letting the crumbs rain down deliberately beside her as if she were nothing more than a servant waiting on their commands. Lily's cheeks flushed crimson, the sting of shame heating her face, but she kept her eyes lowered, refusing to look at them, afraid that meeting their gaze might only invite more cruelty. Her small hands shook as she tried to gather the crumbs, the tray rattling softly with each movement, betraying the storm of fear and humiliation swirling inside her. The girls in silk dresses giggled behind their jeweled hands, whispering to one another while pointing at the dirt clinging to Lily's sleeves, their laughter sharp and merciless like shards of glass. She pressed her lips together tightly, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill, determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. A boy took a half-eaten piece of cake and tossed it near her feet, the frosting splattering on the polished floor as he chuckled, "Clean that too." His voice dripped with arrogance, his friends cheering as if cruelty had become a game of sport among them. Lily bent lower, her knees brushing the cold floor as she reached for the cake, the stickiness coating her small hands, but still she did not utter a word. Her silence was both her shield and her prison, protecting her from escalating their anger, yet trapping her in the role they had cast upon her. Adrian, standing from afar, felt a tightness grow in his chest, each cruel laugh striking him deeper than the last, his polished world of wealth suddenly feeling suffocating and wrong. The sight of children born into abundance mocking one who had nothing pierced him in a way no business betrayal or financial loss ever could. He noticed the way Lily's shoulders quivered as she bent again and again, her body, carrying the invisible weight of humiliation too heavy for her tender age. The clapping grew louder, filling the hall with an ugly rhythm, while adults nearby glanced briefly but did not interfere, their indifference as cutting as the cruelty of the children. Lily's small fingers trembled as she gathered every crumb, each piece an echo of the mockery raining down on her. And though she wanted desperately to vanish, she forced herself to continue. Her face burned, not from the physical strain, but from the knowledge that she was being treated as less than human, her childhood stripped from her moment by moment. Another boy pretended to trip and spill his drink near her, his friends howling with laughter as the liquid splashed dangerously close to her shoes, soaking into the carpet she had just cleaned. She paused only for a second, her eyes flickering with pain, before she knelt once more, determined to finish her task, no matter how many times they ruined it. Her small frame seemed to shrink under the weight of their jeers, yet somewhere in her silence lay a stubborn strength, a refusal to completely break even as the cruelty pressed harder. Adrian's heart clenched tighter as he saw her tiny body bending, rising, bending again like a fragile reed in the wind, bending under pressure but never snapping entirely. The scene before him transformed the glittering hall into a theater of cruelty, the chandeliers above mocking him with their shine as they illuminated not joy but injustice. The cruel laughter rang in his ears, drowning out the music, making every note of the band sound hollow and false. His hands curled slowly into fists at his sides, his instinct screaming at him to intervene, to stop this unkindness, yet for the moment he remained rooted, struck by the rawness of what he was witnessing. Lily's little hands, sticky with cake and wet from juice, continued their cue, yet work. Her head bowed so low it seemed she wished to disappear into the floor itself. But despite her trembling, she did not abandon her task, her small body carrying on with a kind of fragile dignity, as though finishing her duty was the only way she could claim some measure of pride in a world determined to take it from her. And as Adrian watched, each beat of his heart grew heavier until the hall itself felt smaller, darker, and unbearably cold despite all its golden light. Adrian's gaze stayed locked on the fragile figure of Lily, the cruel laughter still echoing faintly in the hall, but fading into the background as his focus narrowed to her alone, as though she were the only real thing in a room full of hollow glitter. He watched her pause for the first time, her small shoulders tightening as if she could no longer carry the invisible weight pressing down on them. Her hand rose slowly, almost hesitantly, to her cheek, and in that fleeting moment he caught the shimmer of a single tear escaping down her face. She turned slightly, making sure no one else saw, her attempt to hide the tear a quiet act of bravery. But Adrian saw it, and it pierced him deeper than the sound of all the mocking laughter combined. The sight of that hidden tear stripped away the last illusion of celebration. The music, the laughter, the chandeliers, all seemed meaningless against the honesty of a child's sorrow. She glanced toward the far side of the room, her eyes searching the open door that led to the kitchen, where shadows of busy staff moved hurriedly. Her gaze lingered there, filled not with hope, but with quiet longing, and Adrian followed it with his own eyes, his heart tightening further when he noticed a weary woman inside, wiping sweat from her brow as she balanced trays heavier than her frame should carry. He recognized immediately the resemblance in her tired eyes, the same softness that lived in Lily's face, and he understood with painful clarity that this must be her mother. The woman's uniform was stained, her movements mechanical from exhaustion, but there was something noble in the way she carried herself despite the burden of poverty pressing down. Lily's eyes stayed fixed on her mother for a heartbeat, as though silently drawing strength from the only person who understood her pain, then dropped again as she returned to her quiet cleaning. Adrian's chest ached, for he realized that Lily was not meant to be here as a worker at all. She was simply a child forced into responsibility far beyond her years, helping her mother because survival had left them no other choice. He thought of the rich children, their laughter still dancing in the corners of the hall, and the contrast burned in him, their wastefulness, their luxury, their careless cruelty compared to the desperate struggle that bound this little girl and her mother together. Lily bent again to pick up another tray, her small fingers adjusting the weight with practiced care, though the tray seemed almost as wide as her arms. Adrian could see her trying to steady herself, her lips pressed tightly, as though she refused to let anyone notice how much effort it cost her. Another tear slid down, quick and silent, hidden behind her lowered lashes, and she brushed it away with the back of her hand, pretending it was nothing more than sweat. That quiet resilience, that refusal to crumble despite the unfairness surrounding her, made Adrian's own throat tighten as he fought against the heaviness building in his chest. Around him, glasses clinked, people toasted, laughter swirled like perfume, but none of it reached him anymore, for he was caught in the gravity of a child's silent suffering. His eyes darted again to the mother in the kitchen, watching as she glanced once toward the hall, her gaze softening for a moment when she saw Lily, though she did not move closer, knowing he could not abandon her work. Adrian caught that fleeting look, the mixture of pride and sorrow in her eyes, and it struck him with a clarity sharper than any speech or lesson. This was not laziness. This was not neglect. This was the desperate sacrifice of a mother who had no other way. Lily's quiet perseverance became a mirror reflecting the injustice of the world he thought he knew so well, and he found himself questioning the very foundation of the glittering life around him. The chandeliers above still glowed, the music still played, yet Adrian felt as though the hall had fallen into silence, because all he could hear was the quiet echo of a child's tear slipping unnoticed into the noise of wealth. Lily paused briefly again, glancing once more toward the kitchen door as if to reassure herself her mother was still there, and then lowered her head, shoulders stiff, determined to finish what she had begun. That small gesture of love and loyalty shook Adrian to his core, for it was clear she was not here for herself, not even because anyone asked her to be. She was here for her mother, bearing burdens that no child should carry. And as Adrian watched her disappear briefly between tables with the heavy tray in her hands, his heart knew with certainty that he could no longer remain still in the shadows of this golden hall. Adrian rose from his chair with a quiet determination, his movement subtle yet powerful enough to shift the atmosphere of the glittering hall. Conversations faltered, laughter dimmed, and eyes turned instinctively toward the tall, commanding figure who now stood with a resolve that made even the chandeliers seem to tremble. Each step he took across the polished marble floor carried weight, not of arrogance but of unshakable purpose, his gaze locked firmly on the small girl who struggled to balance the tray in her tiny hands. The crowd murmured, puzzled at his sudden action, but Adrian ignored the questioning stares, his focus unmoved. When he reached Lily, her small frame stiffened in surprise, her wide eyes lifting slowly to meet his, uncertain and cautious, as though she could not believe someone of his stature would even notice her. Without hesitation, he bent slightly and reached for the heavy tray, his large hand steadying it before gently sliding it out of her trembling grasp. For a moment, Lily froze, her fingers tightening as if she feared punishment. But his voice broke the silence, deep and firm, yet softened by compassion. "No child should be treated this way," he declared, his words ringing clear across the hall like a bell cutting through fog. The air shifted instantly. The mocking chatter of the rich children stopped mid-laugh, replaced by an uneasy silence as their faces flushed with guilt. Parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to respond, but none dared to interrupt. Adrian lowered himself to one knee before Lily, making himself small before the smallest person in the room, his presence no longer towering but tender, his smile warm enough to melt the guarded tension in her eyes. "You're not here to serve. You're here to shine," he whispered, each word carrying a weight of sincerity that no one present could doubt. Lily blinked rapidly, her lips parting as though to speak, yet no words came, only the quiet disbelief of a child unused to kindness from strangers. Adrian reached out a hand, not pulling or forcing, but offering, his gesture a silent invitation to trust. Slowly, hesitantly, Lily's small fingers curled into his, her hand dwarfed by his, but held with the gentlest care. The crowd watched, stunned into stillness, as Adrian guided her toward the grand table at the front of the hall, the very place reserved for honored guests and dignitaries. With each step, Lily glanced nervously around, half expecting someone to stop her, but none dared move against the CEO's quiet authority. When they reached the main table, Adrian pulled out a chair himself, awing the startled expressions of those seated nearby, and gently motioned for her to sit. For the first time all evening, Lily sat not on the floor, not in a corner, but at the place of honor where she belonged in his eyes. A waiter rushed forward uncertainly, but Adrian took the plate himself, carefully setting it before her, the aroma of warm food filling the space between them. He placed the fork gently in her hand, his smile reassuring as he nodded for her to eat without fear. Lily stared at the plate for a long moment, her throat tightening, her hands trembling as though the gift before her was too impossible to accept. Then, slowly, cautiously, she lifted the fork and took a bite, and in that instant her face lit up with a glow so pure, so radiant, it seemed to outshine every chandelier in the hall. The room, once filled with cruel laughter, now held its breath, watching a moment of simple kindness transform into something extraordinary. Adrian's chest swelled with quiet relief, his heart softening further as he saw the spark of joy return to her eyes, fragile but real, a light he knew must never be extinguished again. Around them whispers rippled, some filled with shame, others with admiration, but none louder than the silence of the once mocking children who now stared at the girl with something closer to respect. Adrian did not care for their opinions. His focus remained entirely on Lily, her small smile trembling on the edge of disbelief, her posture slowly easing as she realized she was safe, wanted, and for the first time that night, seen. The grand party had ended, but the memory of that night lingered in Adrian's mind long after the lights had dimmed and the laughter had faded into silence. He could not shake the image of Lily's small hands clutching that heavy tray, nor the fragile smile she gave when he placed food before her. It followed him into his office the next morning, echoed in the quiet moments between meetings, and even lingered as he signed papers worth millions. Wealth, power, and influence had filled his world for years. But now he felt an emptiness, a gnawing thought that all of it meant nothing if children like Lily were left unseen. Driven by this new weight upon his heart, Adrian instructed his assistant to track down the little girl and her mother. It did not take long. Her mother worked as a cleaner for the catering company, earning barely enough to cover rent in a small, worn-down apartment on the city's edge. Adrian did not send for them with pomp or ceremony. Instead, he arrived himself, stepping into the modest space with the same respect he gave the grandest of boardrooms. Lily's mother froze when she saw him at the door, clutching her daughter's shoulder protectively, fearing they might lose even the little they had. But Adrian's voice was steady, filled with warmth as he reassured her that he had not come to take, but to give. He spoke not like a CEO, but like a man humbled by the truth of what he had witnessed, and he laid before them a promise of change, of opportunity, of dignity. He arranged for Lily's immediate admission into one of the best schools in the city, covering every fee, every book, every uniform, ensuring that her path forward would not be burdened by the chains of poverty. He then turned to her mother, placing in her hands not just financial support, but a stable job at his company, one that matched her hard work with fair pay and respect, a job that would allow her to raise her daughter without fear of hunger or eviction. Tears filled the woman's eyes as she listened, her lips quivering with disbelief, her knees nearly giving way beneath the weight of gratitude. Lily, standing quietly beside her, slipped her small hand into Adrian's, her touch soft yet powerful, and looked up with wide, shining eyes. "Thank you for seeing me, when no one else did," she whispered, her voice delicate as a breath, yet strong enough to shatter every wall Adrian had built around his heart. His throat tightened, his eyes stung, and in that moment He realized that no boardroom victory, no stock market triumph, no empire of wealth could ever match the value of those simple words. For the first time in years, he felt truly rich, not in money, but in meaning. He knelt down to Lily's height, squeezing her hand gently, promising silently that she would never again be made to feel invisible. From that day onward, her life transformed. She no longer carried trays in the shadow of cruel laughter, but carried books filled with knowledge, her steps guided by hope. Her mother walked taller too, her back straightened by dignity, her eyes no longer dulled by exhaustion, but brightened by security. Together, they began anew, their days no longer defined by struggle, but by opportunity. And Adrian, watching from afar, felt a new chapter unfold within his own life as well. The measure of his success was no longer etched in the numbers that scrolled across financial reports, but in the light that now burned in Lily's smile. He knew with absolute certainty that true wealth was never found in riches, but in compassion, in the courage to see those the world overlooks, and in the power of kindness to change a life forever.